And that mark, it didn't shine. It wept. It healed. If you've ever wept in secret, but still raised your hands in worship, if you've ever been left out and still chose to love, you may be like her. You may be one of the marked. And if that's true, then this isn't just a story. It's your confirmation, the woman the world overlooked. Ava didn't know she was different. Not until the world treated her like she didn't belong. She wasn't loud. She wasn't dramatic. She just felt things deeper than most. While the other girls were laughing over crushes and lip gloss, Ava sat under the old oak tree behind her grandmother's house, scribbling down things she couldn't explain, words that came out like poems, that felt like prayers. She didn't know it then, but heaven had already begun speaking. In a town where silence was survival and image was everything, Ava didn't fit. She didn't know how to pretend. She could feel lies in a handshake, sense tension in a room where everyone else saw peace. Her Sunday school teacher once told her, "Sweetheart, you're too sensitive. You think too much. Just smile and let it go." So she tried. She smiled through sermons that stirred her spirit, laughed at jokes that pierced her heart, joined the choir even though the spotlight made her tremble. But no matter what she did, she felt like a guest in her own life. Then came the betrayal. It didn't happen in one blow. It came in quiet exits, slow fades, sudden coldness from people she had once prayed with. She was never told what she did wrong. She was just excluded. No phone calls, no invitations, no room for the kind of woman who felt too much and asked too many questions. At first, she begged God to fix it, to bring her friends back, to make her feel normal again. But the more she prayed, the quieter it got. One night, as she stood at the sink rinsing the day's dishes, a memory washed over her. 12 years old, knees on the floor, cracked Bible open to the Psalms. She had prayed a prayer no child should ever have to mean. God, if you can use me, no matter what it costs. She had forgotten those words, but heaven hadn't. It all started to make sense. The betrayals, the heartbreaks, the seasons of loneliness, the gift she didn't ask for, to feel things no one else noticed. She wasn't cursed. She was being carved, not for popularity, but for purpose, not for applause, but for authority. A scar on her soul, the one that still stung in quiet moments, wasn't a flaw. It was a mark. Ava didn't get a breakthrough in a conference. She didn't go viral. She didn't even leave town. But one morning, in the stillness of her kitchen, with nothing but cracked tile and cold coffee beside her, she felt it, the shift. She wasn't asking to be chosen anymore. She was realizing she already had been. It came in a whisper, not outside, but deep within. What if you were never rejected, only refined? If you've ever asked that same question, if you've ever cried over closed doors, or wondered why you keep surviving things that should have shattered you, then Ava's story isn't just hers. It's yours too, because the women the world overlooks are often the ones heaven is hiding until the time is right. In the next chapter, we'll follow Ava through 7 sacred signs, marks that didn't make her popular, but made her powerful. Because once a woman realizes she's marked, nothing in this world can ever keep her small again. Part 1. The scar became the sword. She never spoke of that wound anymore, not because it stopped hurting, but because it had grown quiet, like an old scar that stopped bleeding yet never forgot. Ava carried it the way some women carry perfume, invisibly but unmistakably. You didn't see it when she walked into a room, but you felt it in the weight of her silence, in the way her smile curved like someone who had learned to bless and bleed. She had learned to love from someone who never showed her how, to give tenderness from a heart that had been mishandled. For years she believed the lie, that the abuse made her weaker, that the betrayal had ruined her, that what was done to her had somehow disqualified her from being used by God. But God never discards what He anoints. And somewhere in the shadows of her story, He was turning her agony into anointing, her wound into a weapon. She didn't even realize when it happened. One day she was crying on the floor, asking God why He let them hurt her. And the next, she was praying for someone who had gone through the same thing, and her words carried a fire she didn't know she had. That's when she realized the pain hadn't disappeared. It had been transformed. It had been sharpened into discernment, pressed into compassion, crushed into oil. Her deepest wound had not weakened her. It had marked her, and not for pity, for purpose. She used to think healing meant forgetting, but now she saw it differently. The memory wasn't a prison anymore. It was a map, pinged to the moment heaven put a sword in her spirit. The scar didn't need to fade. It's the signature of survival. If you've ever walked through a storm and came out with your hands still lifted, if you've cried in secret, but still carried peace into a room full of chaos, you carry this mark. You know what it is to hurt and still help, to bleed and still build, to worship with a scar still burning. That scar didn't shame you. It crowned you, and the enemy should have finished the job, because now you have a blade, not in your hand, but in your voice. And every time you speak truth, every time you pray with power, every time you smile when they expected you to shatter, that scar speaks. And what it says is this: I survived, and now I strike. Part 2, Divine Discontent. There was a time Ava would have called this her dream life. A stable job, a quiet home, calendar with color-coded peace. To the outside world, she had arrived, but inside something was stirring. It began as a whisper, soft but insistent. Then came the ache, not of sorrow, but of misplacement, like wearing shoes a half size too small, like smiling in a room where your spirit feels suffocated. Nothing was wrong, but nothing felt right. She'd sit in meetings and feel her soul reaching for something beyond the spreadsheets. She'd laugh with friends and wonder why her heart kept drifting to the mountains, the mission field, the prayer room. She tried to silence it, tried telling herself she was ungrateful, tried gratitude journals, worship playlists, even volunteered more at church. But the tug wouldn't go away. And one night, when the house was still and the noise of the world had finally settled, she heard it again, not with her ears, but in the aching center of her chest. You've outgrown this. Tears welled up before she could even stop them, not because she was sad, but because she finally felt seen. She hadn't been losing interest. She'd been shedding a season. What once felt like calling now felt like confinement. And that wasn't rebellion. It was revelation. She remembered Esther, crowned in gold, wrapped in royal robes, yet restless, not because the palace was too small, but because her purpose was too big. Diva realized she wasn't created for comfort. She was created for kingdom. That's why the compliments no longer satisfied. That's why the pay raise couldn't fill the ache. That's why the room full of friends still made her feel lonely. She wasn't homesick for a place. She was homesick for purpose. And purpose never lets you settle. It shakes you. It stirs you. It ruins your appetite for the average. So she stopped fighting it, stopped apologizing for the restlessness, and started listening. Because deep down she knew the nest was being stirred, so she could finally learn to fly. If you've ever sat in a place that once fulfilled you and felt like you were shrinking, if you've looked around and whispered, "I should be happy, but something feels off," if your soul has started aching in spaces you used to celebrate, you carry this mark. That holy discomfort, it's not a malfunction. It's a summons. It's the breath of God pulling you into a place where your feet have never walked. But your spirit already knows the way. Part 3. The Intercessor's Tears. She didn't mean to cry. The worship song had barely begun, no loud drums, no sweeping chorus. Just a simple melody and a scripture spoken softly over a microphone. And yet something in it shattered her. The tears didn't come from her eyes. They came from somewhere deeper, from the space inside her where words had never been enough. Her shoulders trembled. She turned her face so no one would notice, but heaven already had. He had always noticed. Even when she wept alone in her car, even when she broke down while folding laundry, even when she excused herself at dinners, claiming she had something in her eye, but it was always something in her spirit. Ava felt everything. The sigh behind someone's "I'm fine," the grief hiding inside a forced smile, the ache behind someone's silence. She'd spent years thinking something was wrong with her, that she was too emotional, too reaffected, too soft. But now she knew better. She wasn't too much. She was trusted, because God doesn't give his heart to the careless. He gives it to those who can carry it, weep with it, or with it, pray with it. Ava wasn't broken. She was chosen to feel what others couldn't articulate, to cry the prayers others didn't know how to pray. She didn't ask for this sensitivity. It was given to her before birth, woven into her spirit like silk thread hidden beneath steel. It was why animals followed her, why children curled into her lap, where strangers told her secrets without knowing why, because her presence made the unseen feel safe, because her tears were never just hers. They were the language of heaven, spoken through the vessel of a woman the world called too much. Once, during prayer, a young woman sat beside her, laughing, talking, putting on a brave face. And without a word exchanged, Ava had reached out, took her hand, and began to weep. Not sobbing, not loud, just a stream of tears that wouldn't stop. The young woman froze. Then her own eyes filled with tears. "I never told anyone," she whispered, and she didn't have to. Ava already knew, because Ava had been given burdened compassion, the kind that breaks you open so heaven can pour through. That night, back at home, Ava sat on the edge of her bed. She looked at her tear-streaked reflection and whispered, "God, I don't know why I feel this much, I just know I can't ignore it anymore." And in the quiet, something stirred in her soul. Not a voice, but a knowing. You feel deeply, because you're holding the hearts of others while they sleep. You weep because your tears are water for seeds you'll never see. You cry because someone must, and I chose you. She clutched the blanket near her chest and cried again. But this time, the tears felt holy, not like weakness, but like a calling. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by a sadness that wasn't yours, if you've ever cried without knowing why, if you've ever carried someone else's pain without recognition, and still chose to pray instead of run, you carry this mark. Your sensitivity isn't your flaw. It's your fire. It's how heaven speaks through you. not through thunder, but through tears. You are not too much. You are an intercessor, and while the world sees emotion, heaven sees authority. Part 4. The Unseen Warfare. They said Ava was peaceful, but what they didn't know was that she had to fight for that peace. It wasn't always quiet in her soul. There were nights she didn't sleep, not because of noise outside, but because of the war inside. The battles didn't come with sirens or swords. They came in thought, in delays, in moments where everything went still, and yet something unseen pressed against her spirit. Ava would enter a room and the air would change, not because of what she said, but because of what she carried. She never asked to be a threat. She never asked to make people uncomfortable just by walking in. But when you're marked by heaven, hell takes notice. It started when she said yes to God, not out loud, not in a church aisle, but in that private moment on her bedroom floor years ago, when she whispered, "Use me." She meant it. And the warfare began. Since then, Ava learned this truth. Some storms don't come to destroy you. They come to identify you. The whispers, the betrayals, the sabotage, none of it made sense at first. She was kind, quiet, stayed to herself. And yet, some people targeted her, talked behind her back, misunderstood her boundaries as arrogance. She prayed harder, loved deeper, forgave faster, but the attacks didn't stop. And one day, she cried out, "Why me, God?" And the answer didn't thunder. It whispered, "Because what you carry makes demons tremble. Chosen women don't walk through playgrounds. They're born into battlegrounds." The minute Ava stopped dimming her light, the shadows began to react. The minute she chose purity over popularity, her name became hard to pronounce in certain circles. She wasn't just living, she was provoking, because the light doesn't have to shout, it just has to show up, and the darkness will always notice. To think of Mary, her yes to God didn't just bring blessing, it brought Herod's wrath. Before she could hold Jesus, she had to flee with him, die with him, protect what she was carrying from forces too dark to name. Ava understood this now. Her warfare wasn't punishment, it was proof. There were nights Ava cried without knowing why. There were seasons when no one reached out, when people turned cold, when her name became a rumor instead of a prayer. But instead of collapsing, she began to worship. Instead of quitting, she began to sharpen. Every arrow thrown at her, she turned into a weapon of praise. Now she walks differently, not with fear, but with fire, because she knows. The brighter she shines, the more bugs she'll attract. But that won't stop her from burning. And if you've ever felt under attack for no reason, if you've ever faced sudden slander, unseen resistance, or spiritual fatigue right after committing to your purpose, you carry this mark. You are not cursed. You are confirmed. You are not being punished. You are being positioned. And your presence alone disrupts what darkness tried to keep hidden. So the next time the storm hits, don't ask why me. Lift your head and whisper, "It's because I'm carrying something holy." Because the chosen woman isn't just peaceful, she's dangerous to anything that fears the light. Part 5. The loneliness that refined you. Ava had never feared being alone. What frightened her was being surrounded and still feeling invisible. There's a silence only the chosen understand, not the kind that soothes, but the kind that exposes, the kind that echoes back your deepest question. Do I even belong anywhere? Ava had walked into rooms where everyone smiled, but no one saw her. She'd spoken truth and been labeled judgmental, held boundaries, and been called proud. She didn't argue. She just withdrew, not out of bitterness, but because she was tired of explaining who she was to people committed to misunderstanding her. At first she took it personally. Why didn't they invite her? Why didn't they check in? Why did her name seem to disappear from their lips unless they needed something? But over time, her questions turned into prayers, and her prayers turned into fire. One night, while eating dinner alone at the small kitchen table her grandfather built, Ava whispered, "God, am I really that easy to forget?" And the answer came not with words, but weight, a sacred, sudden stillness that filled the room like oil. She felt it in her bones. You were never forgotten. You were hidden. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She looked around. No one else in the room. No audience. No comfort. And yet, she wasn't alone. She was in the presence of the refiner. It was in that solitude God spoke the loudest, pulled things out of her, poured things into her. The woman who once wept because she wasn't invited was now being anointed in secret, not for clicks, but for calling. She thought about Hagar, alone in the wilderness, cast out by those who used her. But it was in the wilderness that God revealed himself as Il Roi, the God who sees. She thought about David, overlooked by his own father, left with the sheep. But God anointed him there, in the field, in the forgotten place. She thought about Jesus, withdrawing to lonely places, not because he lacked love, but because he needed alignment. And then it clicked. The loneliness wasn't rejection, it was refinement. There's a holy fire that only ignites in isolation, a depth that only forms when the applause is gone, a strength that rises from soil no one else thought was fertile. Ava wasn't being punished. She was being planted. God had placed her in the hidden room so she could emerge carrying glory, not to impress, but to impact. Now, when she walks into a room and no one notices, she smiles, because she knows heaven is watching. She knows her silence speaks louder than small talk ever could. She knows she's not alone. She's set apart. If you've ever felt forgotten, if you've walked through life wondering why you never quite fit, why you're always the one sitting at the edge of the circle, why your silence feels sacred, even when it hurts, you carry this mark. And that ache, it isn't abandonment, it's alignment. He's not punishing you, he's preparing you to rise in a way no one will expect. So don't curse the quiet, lean into it, because heaven does its deepest work in the loneliest rooms. Part 6. The growth no one saw. It didn't look like anything was happening. That's what made it so painful. No breakthrough, no spotlight, no confirmation that the prayers she whispered into her pillow had even reached the ceiling. Ava kept showing up, to work, to worship, to life. But it felt like no one noticed, not even God. She watered the seeds. She served in silence. She forgave in secret. And still, nothing bloomed. Or so she thought. Because growth doesn't always look like success. Sometimes it looks like survival. Sometimes it looks like roots. And roots don't make noise. They dig deep. They stretch wide. They hold firm, long before anyone sees the fruit. Ava had spent years underground, spiritually, emotionally, socially. She gave when no one clapped, loved when no one thanked her, labored when no one saw the burden she carried. And just when she was about to question her worth again, the Holy Spirit whispered, "You weren't buried, you were planted." She remembered Ruth. No title, no audience, just obedience in the fields, bending, gleaning, gathering scraps. And God saw her. He sent Boaz. He restored her name. He used her story to birth a legacy she never imagined. Suddenly, Ava realized the nights she cried alone were watering something holy. The mornings she got up and tried again were building spiritual muscle. The seasons she thought she was wasting were seasons of becoming, not for the world's validation, but for heaven's unveiling. Ava was not waiting to be discovered. She was being developed. In the dark, in the quiet, in the hidden. Now she no longer despised the silence. She embraced it, because that's where her discernment sharpened. That's where her identity took root. That's where God carved her into a woman who wouldn't collapse under calling, because her roots were too deep. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've poured out your soul with no applause, if you've served behind the scenes while others took credit, you carry this mark. And the darkness wasn't your tomb, it was your training ground. The deeper your roots, the higher you'll rise. But it had to happen in the hidden, because visibility too early can ruin what God intends to reveal. You are not behind. You are not overlooked. You are in process. So keep growing, keep obeying, keep showing up, because heaven sees. And what God grows in the dark, no man can uproot in the light. Part 7. The joy that hell couldn't steal. Joy wasn't something Ava wore. It wasn't a performance or a mask. It was a flame, flickering quietly in her chest, burning even in the coldest seasons. She'd known grief, burial-level grief, the kind of sorrow that wraps around your ribcage and squeezes until you forget how to breathe. She had lost friends, opportunities, years she could never get back. But through it all, she laughed, not because it didn't hurt, but because joy refused to die. It would sneak up on her in the smallest moments, while washing dishes and hearing a worship song she'd forgotten she loved, while watching the sunrise spill gold over the kitchen floor, while remembering that, even in the worst moments, she never walked alone. Is that joy? It wasn't mood. It wasn't hype. It was holy rebellion. Ava had learned what the devil hates most. Oh, praise on a stage, not tongues in a microphone, but joy in the dry place. Joy when there's no breakthrough. Joy when the account is empty. Joy when the prayer hasn't been answered. And the silence feels like abandonment. But still, you sing. That's what makes hell nervous. Not a woman who gets everything, but a woman who loses it all and still raises her hands. He remembered the night the doctor said it might be cancer. She sat in her car for over an hour after the appointment. No music, no tears, just stillness. And then she whispered, "Even now I trust you." And that whisper cracked the atmosphere. She didn't know it then, but heaven roared, because the enemy thought he had her. But he forgot something. Joy wasn't her personality. It was her weapon. That's what joy is, after all. Not denial, not delusion, but defiance. A sacred shout in the face of despair. Ava had learned to laugh at lack, to smile through storms, to declare it is well when nothing made sense. Not because she was naive, but because she was anchored. If you've ever smiled while breaking, if you've ever danced when everything in you wanted to disappear, if you've ever lifted your voice when fear tried to silence you, you carry this mark. And this joy, this unshakable, fire-forged, heaven-born joy, means the enemy lost. Because if he couldn't steal your worship in the wilderness, he can't stop your purpose in the promised land. So laugh again, sing again, Breathe deep and remember, you made it, and joy is your reward. The woman hell fears and heaven favors. Eva no longer asked why it had to happen. She stopped questioning the wilderness, stopped rehearsing the betrayal, stopped wondering what she could have done differently to be chosen by people, because now she knew she was chosen by God, and his selection always comes with silence first. Isolation, yes. Tests no one sees but heaven records. She used to mourn the years she spent hidden. Now she wears them like armor. She used to hide her scars. Now she draws strength from them because they testify louder than any platform ever could. The same woman who once stood outside the crowd is now the one others come to for wisdom, for intercession, for truth that cuts clean and heals deep. Not because she's loud, not because she's polished, but because she is marked. And the marks, they were never flaws. They were fingerprints, an imprint on a soul that chose to stay soft in a hardened world, that kept trusting after loss, that kept loving after betrayal, that kept worshipping through the fire. Eva was never overlooked. She was being preserved, not for applause, but for assignment, not to fit in, but to stand apart. Diamond. Now when she walks into rooms, she no longer wonders who will see her. She knows heaven already has. She no longer seeks to belong. She carries the presence of the one who set her apart, and the very rooms that once rejected her now tremble at her arrival. As the voice can't do these things, she shifts atmospheres. To the women watching, to the ones who have wept in secret, forgiven without apology, loved without return. You're not broken. You're not too much. You're not late. You are marked. You are the kind of woman hell fears and heaven favors. And if you still have breath in your lungs, you still have oil in your jar, you still have joy to release, you still have territory to claim. Your scars are not shame. They are signs that you survived. Your discontent was not dysfunction. It was divine direction. Your tears were not wasted. They were weapons. Your isolation wasn't punishment. It was preparation. Your growth in darkness was not burial. It was becoming. And your joy, that unstoppable, contagious, unexplainable joy, is the proof that the enemy failed. So stand up, babe. Stand up, daughter. You are marked. You are mighty. You are chosen. And you are not done. She didn't hear thunder. She heard peace. And that peace had a name. He says, if this story spoke to your soul, leave a comment below. I carry the mark. I am a chosen woman. Tag someone who needs to hear this. Share it with a sister walking through silence. And if you believe this mission should continue, help support the journey, however God leads. Because someone out there is still weeping, wondering if the fire will consume her. She needs your story. She needs your yes.